Welcome back. Our third and final session on day one of the Asia Economic Dialogue 2022 will look at whether the Asian industry can lead in the post-pandemic world. Dr. Ganesh Natarajan, Chairman, 5F World and Trustee PIC, will chair this forum, which features Dr. Joerg Wuttke, President, European Chamber of Commerce in China, Ms. Nihad Kabir, Senior Advocate and Chairperson, Business Initiative Leading Development, BUILD, Bangladesh, Mr. Sung, President, LG Chem, South Korea, and Dr. Baba Kalyani, Chairman and MD, Bharat Forge, India. Dr. Natarajan, over to you.
Sure, thank you very much, Shilpa, and it's an absolute pleasure for me to lead this session in what is now the third edition of the Asia Economic Dialogue. And we've always had some very interesting insights that emerged from these panels. And this morning, of course, we had our External Affairs Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, and a few others, really talking about how I think most of the Asian countries have overcome or overcoming the COVID crisis and looking forward to the future very substantial. So I'm delighted that we have four amazing panelists, literally from different parts of the world, right here in India, then of course, Korea, Bangladesh, and China. And I think that pretty much covers the ground that we want to. So in terms of just giving some context to this topic, when we say, can Asian industry lead? I think it certainly can, because even if you look at it a couple of centuries ago, I think Asia was 50% of global GDP. And if you look at what has happened, maybe the 19th century, you could call it the imperial or the British century. The last century, of course, was very much the growth of America. But we really believe that this century could be the Asian century. And many of us who have lived and worked and traveled in Asia really see all the possibilities of making that happen. Just to give you one data point, even if India maybe grows to a 1.5 billion population and the average GDP is $10,000, then we're talking about a 15 trillion economy, which itself would be comparable to some of the very large Western economies. China is already there in terms of 14 trillion and growing. So I think that's clearly the opportunity. We're also finding that in recent times, Japan, for instance, most of us use social media and we're all very familiar with the emojis. And as you know, it came from Japan. So that's a very trivial example. But today, if you look at the discussions, I'm just coming from a panel where I was talking about Society 5.0. And the whole thinking around Society 5.0 was created in Japan with an aging population, with all the attributes of trying to live life better. So clearly there are leading indicators of what is possible. Having said that, I think if you look at the major economies in Asia, which have obviously done extremely well, and that includes Japan, that of course includes China, Korea, Malaysia, and in more recent times, I think Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, Bangladesh, I think thanks to your amazing textile industry. We're also seeing signs of Sri Lanka, Mongolia, Iraq, all coming to the fore. And Pakistan, Turkey, so many others. So I think there is clearly a number of countries jostling for growth domestically as well as internationally. And we are likely to see good growth happen. We do have some issues that we can touch upon as we go along, because if you look at the successful Western economies, they've all been built in a spirit of freedom, in terms of dispersal of power, et cetera, which some of us are still contending with. And we need to address the inequality that is sometimes there in Asian economies, the middle income trap that many of our countries we are seeing are getting into, which is the inability to break out beyond that. Natural resources, which are dwindling in many parts of Asia. Global warming, of course, which is a commitment that most Asian countries have now made. And finally, I think you're looking at geopolitical tensions, which still haven't gone away, and getting rid of the COVID problem and facing up to what is happening in other parts of the world. So I think we have a very interesting few years ahead of us, and whether you call this the Asian decade or we look forward to the Asian century, I think there are opportunities galore and quite a few challenges. So ladies and gentlemen, the way we'll structure this session is, I'll request each of our panelists from different parts of Asia to give us their initial views in maybe 6 to 8 minutes on what they think are the opportunities and challenges, what they believe is their view on this topic, and maybe specifically talk to their countries, the countries they come from, and say what they see as the opportunity in our own country. So I think that's one way of doing it. So we'll lead with Dr. Kalyani, and then we will move to Nihad, and then Sung from Korea, and then Joerg, who's from Germany originally, but living in China for many, many years. So over to you, Baba, your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Ganesh. By the way, in the list of your Asian countries, you didn't say India, so I'm a little.
Oops, too close to home.
Yes, exactly. I think that's important. First of all, I think whether Asian industry can lead the post-pandemic world, which is your headline for this dialogue today. I think Asia is already leading the post-pandemic world. I think it was even leading the pre-pandemic world. I think Asian economy, all of Asia's GDP is greater than the rest of the world from 2020 onwards. So I don't think there is any question in anybody's mind whether Asia is leading or will lead the post-pandemic world. I think the post-pandemic world has created some very interesting scenarios, both geopolitical, in terms of technology disruptions, in terms of how countries have tackled the pandemic issue itself, and how technologies have been developed, the speed at which they have been developed. It has been quite an amazing journey for the last 2 years. So I'd just like to mention a little bit about what happened in India. In March of 2020, when the COVID became a word that was COVID-19 became a word known to everybody on this planet, and India got into a lockdown on the 23rd of March for almost 3 months. I think pretty much rest of the world was wondering whether a country like India, with very poor infrastructure, with a population of 1.3 billion people, with hardly any known medical infrastructure, would be able to tackle the pandemic, and how will it happen, and how will it impact the rest of the world if some 10-15 million Indians got infected, and that infection started spreading around. You look today, 2 years later, I think we have done remarkably well, remarkably better than most Western countries, which is quite surprising. Okay, we were able to handle all the issues of the pandemic in the first 6 months. That means from March to September. The 3 months of lockdown gave us enough opportunity to really create the infrastructure, the healthcare system, and do whatever was required in a mission mode at pretty high speed. In March, we were producing no PPE kits, we were producing no ventilators, we didn't have enough oxygen, we didn't have enough hospital beds. I think by October, those problems were all solved. And we were exporting PPE kits. We had reasonable amount of oxygen. It got into a little trouble in the second wave, which came in 21. But I think that didn't last too long, but we were able to solve it. Most importantly, India produced its own vaccines. We now had 3 vaccine manufacturers in India approved, and we have vaccinated 1.1 billion people. A feat I haven't seen done anywhere else in the world. And if you look at the Omicron crisis today, just today's figures I saw in this evening on the television, we are 16,000 infections, okay? Whereas I think 3 weeks ago, we were at some 300,000 or 400,000 or something like that. So I think, it's an indicator of what a country can do with good political leadership, with everybody in sync with what needs to be done. And I would call this something like all Indians, a billion plus Indians today, have an emotional quotient that is synchronizing with Prime Minister Modi's call. We have a great leadership, and this is what has helped us survive through this crisis and will take us to where we need to be. I'm quite sure that by 2030, 2031, we will be the 3rd largest economy on this planet. And you talked a little bit about what happened a couple of centuries ago, and then what happened in the last century. In the last century, we have just eaten up our planet and growth. And, everybody in the Western world has consumed 10 times more than what we consume, or what at least the Asian economies were consuming on a per capita basis. And I think it's time now to get back to this planet, give back to the planet. And I think that's where Asia is going to score, and that's where India will score extremely well. So that's my opening statement.
What about industry, Baba? Do you think that there are specific industry sectors from India, or for that matter from China, from Asia, which will really become globally dominant?
I think I would say that, if you look at China today, almost every industry sector in China is fairly globally dominant. Starting from the basic industry, look at the steel industry, look at the automotive industry, the chemicals industry, the pharmaceutical ingredients industry, they're pretty dominant. The size and scale of the Chinese industry is quite amazing. I used to run a plant in China for 10 years. So I'm quite familiar with China, and our plant was located in Changchun, northeast of China, very close to the FAW Auto Works. So I've seen Changchun. When I went in there in 2005, there were only bicycles on the road. And when I left in 2014, there were no bicycles, there were bullet trains, and there were only cars. So I've seen how quickly, and that's a 5 million city. It's not a small town by any means. How quickly China and Chinese towns were able to change and industrialize themselves. And you will see the same thing happening in India. You will see in this next 10 years, in this decade, Indian industry will move exactly in the same direction, except we will be more greener, we will use more renewable energy, we will be far more sustainable. That's the big advantage that India has. Because of our industrial infrastructure being at such a low level, everything new that we build will be green. We don't have to go through the same process of building a black-brown infrastructure and then trying to make it green. Okay, and that's why today, if you look at solar power in India, it's got the lowest tariff in the world. You can, our solar power is auctioned at some 2 rupees 20 paisa per unit. I don't think anywhere in the world it gets auctioned at that price. So we got a lot of good things going for us. Yes, this whole Atmanirbhar initiative of the Honorable Prime Minister will drive industry, industrial growth. We got this whole electrification EV business. You will see Indian companies developing EV technologies that are probably better than the West. So lots of things happening.
Thank you, Baba, for your tremendous optimism, as always. So that's great. Okay, so let's move to a neighboring country. Nihad, would you like to talk to us a little bit about Bangladesh and your own view of Asia?
Certainly. Thank you very much indeed. It's a privilege to be here with all of you. The question which was asked, that whether Asian industry can lead in the post-pandemic world, I think.
Yeah,
you're getting some interrupt.
And I'm very optimistic about that. When I look at even what happened. Can you hear me?
No, you're getting interrupted. I mean, after every few words, it just goes off.
Ma'am, may I request you to please restart your talk?
Is it better now? Because there's a bit of problem. Would you come back?
Yes, we can hear you now.
I think that,
well, if you can hear me,
we better switch off our videos, and it might be better.
No, I think Nihad, if you try, switching off your video, I think it may be. You just try that.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So what I was trying to say is that post-pandemic, at least in Bangladesh, and also I think globally, we're seeing a fairly swift bouncing back of our economies, although inflation seems to be a bit of a concern. But, you know, countries have found ways now to cope with COVID. And I don't think that we're going to, you know, barring an exceptionally strong coming back of the COVID virus, I don't think we're going to see that countries are going to stop the way they did and go into lockdown in 2020 and in parts of 2021. In Bangladesh, given the scarcity of our resources, I think we've managed to handle the health issues raised by COVID fairly well. And as of yesterday, I think more than 100 million people had received vaccines, of whom about 80 million people in Bangladesh have received their second doses. And we're also on to booster doses now. Thanks to getting vaccines from India and China, among others. During the worst phases of the pandemic and very early on in 2020, to an extent in response to some of the policy discussions we had from the private sector with the government, our government injected funds in support of industry and also cash infusions for the most vulnerable. And the private sector rallied around with the government in this, and that really helped to mitigate a lot of what could have been a very bad position, again, given our limited resources, both economically and in the health sector. If we look at Bangladesh, we see that if we talk about both manufacturing and service industries, the ebbs in one appear to be somewhat balanced by the flows in the other. We have seen during the pandemic that where essential goods and pharmaceuticals did well, so did the health sector, the e-commerce and mobile financial service sectors. And there's also been a shift away from our usual learning experiences to digital learning, digital classrooms, because our schools were closed for a very long time. And we also see from our policymakers a move towards skill training, skill-based training, which is going to be very important in the coming years. From a Bangladesh perspective, when we look at Asia as a whole, we see that the world's largest manufacturing region is recovering fast. The issues which arose in the supply chain and cross-border value chains, those are being resolved, but we will have to pay more attention to resolving those, and the weaknesses which have absolutely been brought to the forefront by the pandemic, that we need to work together to resolve those if we're going to carry on being the production powerhouse of the world. Now, in Bangladesh, we've also seen, and I think other countries in Asia have also seen this, that the issues relating to this movement has resulted in a push for digitalization of manufacturing processes as well as business processes. For us, adoption of digital technology has been swift, again, considering our resources. And we have been helped by not having very huge legacy technology issues. In fact, we joke that Bangladesh will jump from 1IR to 4IR without really having to go through the intermediate stages. Let me give you a very quick summary of where we see Bangladesh. As I have said, we are nimble and agile. We are good at overcoming resource constraints, and we don't have these legacy technology issues. We have a proven track record of being able to build global scale manufacturing. You mentioned garments, but also pharmaceuticals going that way. We offer huge duty-free and quota-free access to, maybe 3 billion people in the world. We have a strong local demand. We have a geographical and demographic advantage. And, our domestic economy has been, we are nowhere near, of course, India and China, but Bangladesh $1 trillion economy in the next couple of years. I'll name a few of the companies which actually have the best performing units, like Citibank, Nestle, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, GE, I can go on. In some ways, we're the undiscovered place yet, but having said that, we are not unique to Asia. I think many other countries here in Asia are showing these sort of potentials. And if we can really work to that, if we can address the challenges like the cross-border trade, etc., the removal of NTBs, I think we will be, as we will be able to be a very strong part of Asia continuing to be service industries.
Great. Thank you very much, Nihad. I think that's, again, a very positive. You're right. I mean, it's not just garments, but also probably pharmaceuticals, where you see a big opportunity. And it's good to see the confidence in Bangladesh. And whenever I visit there, I'm always taken up by that. That's fantastic. So let me move quickly to Sung. And Sung, your views, please. And I mean, Korea, as I mentioned earlier, is already a phenomenal success story. But how do you see Korea? How do you see Asia leading industrially the rest of the world?
Yeah, so if I can, I'll speak about LG Chem, which is my company, and from the chemical sector, how we could actually lead the industry post-pandemic world. The short answer is yes. As Dr. Ganesh has shared his thoughts, I do agree that we can actually lead, but we face many challenges ahead. The biggest one is the climate change. Can we create new sustainable businesses and reduce carbon emissions at the same time? I think there's an urgency to act, otherwise we'll be left behind. LG Chem has emerged out of COVID-19 pandemic stronger than before. I will share LG Chem's strategy and execution plan for sustainable growth in a post-pandemic era to demonstrate that an Asian company can lead. The LG Chem has constantly grown as a company. We have been able to grow even amid the Asian crisis, as well as global financial crisis. Looking at the past 2 decades, we have grown over 10-folds and reached a new record high performance in 2021, despite COVID-19 pandemic. So this is a record revenue as well as operating profit in 2021 as a chemical company. Whatever the business environment, with our own unique approach, we have taken a long-term view on the industry to create growth and have diversified our business portfolio over last decade or so. The current business environment represents an age of significant transformation. The climate change crisis has taken center stage, and carbon reduction has become a key agenda. In addition, the digital transformation and the post-pandemic environment after COVID also represents change. These are all changes that could impact the growth of a company and also whether it survives in the future. In this environment, the behaviors, order of the past will no longer be valid. The success of the past does not guarantee the success of the future. I expect there to be a significant reset to take place in each industry. This transformation, which will change the world as we know it today, will be a crisis to some, but an opportunity for others. For example, if you look at automotive industry, companies that have been the most active in addressing climate change and digital transformation have recently seen their market cap surge, even if they have less sales volume or significantly lower revenue than others. The market will place high value on these companies. In the chemical industry, the company that is able to adapt quickly will ultimately survive and grow. For many years, LG Chem has been expanding outside of the chemical business into new businesses like batteries and battery materials, which has strengthened its market cap. Global chemical companies, we enjoy a higher corporate valuations, which places us next to the top chemical companies. By actively embracing the change taking place, we believe we can enhance it further. LG Chem will continue to actively responding to changes taking place and to enhance its competitiveness with the goal of becoming not only a chemical company, but a sustainable top global science company. Let me talk about the two strategic directions we have to become a top global science company. The first is a sustainable growth strategy for this age of transformation. And the second is LG Chem's roadmap to achieve net zero carbon emissions to address climate change by 2050. LG Chem's three new growth drivers are namely the sustainability businesses focused on eco-friendly materials, the e-mobility businesses focused on battery materials, and the innovative new pharmaceutical drugs. In line with the massive industrial changes, through thorough execution, we'll achieve growth according to our plan. Backed by the growth of these three new growth drivers, excluding LG Energy Solution, which is our battery business, which has been spun off, LG Chem's directly operated businesses' total revenue will grow double by 2030 to 60 trillion Korean won. LG Chem formally announced its commitment to achieve carbon neutral growth by 2030 and net zero by 2050. Keeping carbon emissions at zero in 2050 is a massive challenge to reduce essentially about 20 million tons of the carbon emissions has to be reduced to achieve net zero. Indeed, it will be at the forefront of execution through meticulous technology development and planning. In summary, LG Chem, while pursuing continued growth by focusing on the three new growth drivers in this transformative era, will achieve the 2050 net zero target to actively respond to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sung. And would you like to just add a few comments on Korea? I mean, I understand the chemical sector, but beyond that, do you think there are other areas, I mean, like telecom, phones? I use a Korean phone and a lot of people in India do that. Or any other sector that you feel that will really dominate as you go along?
I think that Korea is very much manufacturing-centric economy. And I spoke about the climate change and the impact of carbon emission reductions that that we have to achieve. The Korea faces actually even more challenge because it's a very carbon-intensive manufacturing, such as refining, petrochemicals, steel industry. So, although many companies are transforming through digital transformation, and it is looking at advanced robotics. It is investing in new pharmaceutical manufacturing, et cetera, But fundamentally, Korea to emerge from this post-pandemic era, it has to reduce its carbon intensity through deployment of renewable, whether it's clean hydrogen, to replace natural gas or coal, for not only power generation, but petrochemicals industry as well as steel. So I think those are the key focus areas for Korea. And we're working with the Korean government, and I think the policy is I must admit, Korea is a little slow from the policy perspective. So the industry is engaging actively with the Korean government to change its policy to essentially help the industry to achieve the carbon reductions they require.
Oh, thank you. That was very useful. Okay, let's move to Joerg. So Joerg, I think I want you to look at your own dual role of being European, but as you said, many years in China. So, but tell us a little bit about your point of view on China, and where do you think, I mean, what's the great success that Dr. Kalyani also alluded to, and where do you think it's going to go from here, and will it continue to lead as far as the Asian decade or century is concerned?
Well, I mean, Asia, in many ways, as was rightfully mentioned before, has been leading industry development. Again, Japan was first, Korea followed, Taiwan. It was very important, and of course now China is a giant. I mean, China in many ways economically is not a country; it's a continent. If you just take the province of Guangdong, with 120 million people, has the GDP of Russia, and the city of Shenzhen has the GDP of South Africa. So in a way, it's sometimes wrong to see just the Chinese market. We have pockets, and my own country, Germany, would be population-wise number 4 in China. I mean, you in India, of course, can match it in many ways, but China has been incredibly strong in economic growth, has been pulling the world out of the pandemic economic growth pattern. We had a growth of 30% over the last years of global growth, and I guess that's going to shrink to about 20%. I'm in the chemical field as well. I'm heading BASF over here. And we had an incredible run since May of 2020 already, growing double digit last year as well. The growth pattern of chemicals is just enormous. And as you know, talking about industrial lead, the chemistry, as Ms. Son said before, the industry, our industry is the industry of industries. And we are sort of with every finger in every pie. The growth pattern that my company sees for chemicals, China will stand for 60% of global growth in chemistry, 60. And in 2030, China will stand for half of the global chemical market. So meaning that they are definitely going to be a dominating force. And hence, that's why my company, as well as LG Chem, is such a strong investor here. I'm just implementing the largest project we ever done in our history. It's a $10 billion investment in Guangdong that we are working and hoping to start the first machinery this year. So in a way, it's just gigantic, but it also faces lots of challenges. It's not a given that China will actually catch up with other economies. The middle income trap comes into mind. The aging that Japan and Korea have seen, it will be even more dramatic in China, given the one child policy. Then we have an assertive China, which manages to really annoy all the neighbors and sort of take on everyone who's not exactly copying China's lines and threatening even major economies like Europe. We just had this Lithuania case. That, of course, can be very disruptive. And so my chamber, which I'm heading in nighttime, daytime job is chemistry, evening, like now, I can talk about European business. We have 1,800 members in 9 cities across China. And we published a paper on decoupling, that China actively is seeking decoupling, also in view of what Trump did to China. But the decoupling has many downsides to it. And of course, as European business, we're caught in between. You have the decoupling on the US side, in particular IT, putting companies on the list, export licenses being revoked. At the same time, China reciprocating this. And sometimes we end up between a rock and a hard place. Decoupling is deeply disruptive, but is actively being sought as well from the US as well as China. And so we published a paper in January, which you can download from our website, no fees, no membership needed. And we followed up in September with our customary position paper about doing business in China. Now that's a huge piece, beats even, I think, text-wise, War and Peace. We have 430 pages and 900 recommendations to the Chinese government. And in that study, actually, we address self-reliance. China's attempt to become self-reliant, disconnecting in many ways from the global economy, mostly for security reasons. And that, of course, for us as exporters, but also as investors, a major challenge, because yes, I might have a $10 billion investment in China, but am I going to be still able to control this eventually? That's a question that all of us raise. So self-reliance is the topic of this paper, and we have done with the World Bank a little study in there, indicating what it does to China itself. China is now at $16,800 PPP per person. And also in the study, we have a very interesting chart looking at the opening up of 4 economies, Taiwan, Korea, Japan, and the People's Republic, putting basically the opening up at 0 and then tracing 40 years of how these countries developed. And you can see Taiwan, Korea, Japan, and People's Republic developed per capita GDP, PPP terms, identical. So in a way, China was nothing special. It's just times 1.4 billion people. And what is actually quite surprising over the last 6 years, the Chinese GDP per capita is falling behind Korea quite dramatically. We have 40 years and opening up. That's pretty much shortly before Korea had this 97 crisis. But Korea bounced back very strongly. And China is now already behind Korea, Taiwan, and pretty much sort of focusing more on Japan. And if they go for muddling through, meaning doing the same thing for the next 30 years, that's what the study does until 2050, China will eventually reach the GDP per capita from Japan in power purchasing parity, but will be far behind Korea, who is #1, and Taiwan as #2. So we have run a scenario about self-reliance, China disconnecting, and China will dramatically fall behind all the other 3 economies. And then we have run a piece about China opening up, connecting, and China takes off like a rocket. China has an incredible potential. And so the delta between the best case 2050 and basically the self-reliance cutting itself off from the world is a cool $22,500 per capita. So if China goes for self-reliance, they are willing politically to give away per person 22,500 in the year 2050. And we asked the Chinese government, why do you do this to yourself? And I mean, for us, it all means demand. It means 22,500 times 1.4 billion people. At that time, India will be more populous, I guess. So it is something that actually is quite worrisome that China politically is willing to cut into its own flesh and actually punch below its weight, I would say. That concerns us, of course, in industry, because we want China to succeed. Let's see if that's possible. The opportunities, of course, are ample. First of all, China has an incredible infrastructure, has a very good education system, in particular in cities that are more diverse, like Shenzhen, where you have Huawei and Tencent and so forth. Urbanization is still very far away. It's, I think, 50–55% of population are only urbanized. So there's still a long way to go for China to grow. But again, it seems to be that politics trumps economy in this country, and that China actually might give away a lot of economic potential because the party wants to stay in power, the party wants to stay in control. And that, of course, is quite worrisome. The opportunities, of course, again, are strong, of course, in chemistry, because the industrial landscape gets better and bigger. People are getting more demanding. We have urbanization again as a driver. And then, of course, the big one is decarbonization. China is 25% of global emissions, and definitely we need China to clean up in order to be able to breathe in 50 years from now. So that's a big challenge. I mean, China's economy is still largely coal-based. China has about, in consumption, 60–65% still based on coal. They have made an incredible performance in building wind farms and solar and so on and so on. But I mean, it happens to be that the solar is maybe active 1,200 hours a year, wind maybe 2,500, and coal is just so dominant in this that we have a very big gap between utilized and actually installed capacity. So China, until 2050, has to shut down 660 gigawatt of coal-fired power stations to get anywhere close to being carbon neutral. 660 gigawatt is an interesting figure because that is the entire installed power fleet of the European Union. So what China has to achieve is, while consumption per capita in energy is rising, unlike in Europe and in the US, where Beijing is falling, so it's much easier for us there. While it's rising per capita, China promises to peak fast and basically be carbon neutral, and a feat unheard of. India, I guess, is going to face the problem eventually as well. And 660 gigawatt means, you know, how do you replace that? So I guess that there will be a huge market for batteries, stationary energy batteries. And China will be going very strong and shutting down industries that are basically very high energy intensive. Cement, for example. China produced as much cement in 2 years like the United States in 100 years. And it's not really needed anymore to that extent. Steel is the same, of course, related to construction, aluminum. And then, of course, we in chemicals are quite eager to be carbon neutral as well by changing our processes and so forth. So challenges are major. And I come to the black swan. event, that's Omicron. You know, as all of you talked about COVID in your respective countries, you have better vaccine than we have here. You had herd immunity. You had a lot of cases. So there's a strong herd immunity in India, I know, and in China, zero, virtually zero, because we had zero cases. We have a very, very shallow flu shot called Sinovac and Sinopharm. I got this twice. And we now face the situation that the world is recovering with normal activity, and we're stuck. We are stuck in this zero tolerance environment where we can't open the border, and every case leads to this whack-a-mole kind of shutting down schools and so forth and so forth. And it's really worrisome how they want to get out of this. China cannot open the border now, impossible, because they don't have enough quarantine facilities. It's 3 weeks by now. So what we feel now is that, first of all, we are stuck in many ways. And second, of course, the world bounces back and doesn't need all these exports anymore that China was gaining. The economic drive that came primarily from Europe and the US by huge demand on everything that you needed in a lockdown, not needed anymore. So the driver of exports will basically collapse or sink dramatically, which then again has, of course, headwinds for the economy. So it's a very mixed bag, but never mind, you know, you have to be in China, particularly in chemicals. And if you're not at the table, you're going to be on the menu.
Thank you, George. That was a lovely ending. And just to take you up on that whack-a-mole point you made, I mean, isn't the biggest mole that's being whacked is people like Jack Ma? So do you really think that, you know, getting rid of wet tech, you know, getting people who are listed in the US to literally come back and getting large entities like Ant and Alibaba to kind of come to heel, if you will? So you're saying that that can be very detrimental in the long term, isn't it, to China?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have the party going after Tencent and Alibaba and others. They demolished, I think, a market value of $1.2 trillion US. So no big loss there. Of course, it has to do with power. You know, there cannot be a second god next to the party secretary. Of course, he doesn't want to have any oligarchs. That's possibly what he learned from the Yeltsin years. He doesn't want to reform the political system. That's what he learned from the Gorbachev years, I guess. So in a way, it's all about control and being cautious. But again, cautious means forfeiting economic growth, forfeiting also innovation. China lacks tremendously diversity, something that I guess your countries are much stronger in. And hence, we are running the risk that China, with all its potential, might actually punch below its weight. COVID might actually enforce this. COVID has been a driver of insulation that actually comes handy for the party secretary. No more evil foreign influence in many ways, but it also narrows the kind of sight on the world. China is living, or the leadership, in an echo chamber, and I think they have no idea what it does to them. I mean, their relationship with India is absolutely sub-zero. And they're US anyhow. So when you look around, it's not many friends, actually no friends anymore, except maybe Pakistan. And Russia is a convenient ally, but not a friend. So it's worrisome to what extent, again, we had this in the Mao years, politics is willing to cut into the flesh of the economy to an extent which I never thought was possible 10 years ago.
No, that's amazing, Joerg, and thank you for being so frank and so candid. I think it makes tremendous sense what all you said. In fact, the Pune International Center, 6 of us just got together and published a book on India against, not India against, but really India vis-a-vis China in terms of the growth possibilities.
The long game. And I can only recommend, I don't get any commission from VJ. Of course, the first 6 chapters are totally depressing of how China manages to pull India over the table. But chapter 7 is mind-blowing, and I actually bought it and I sent it to all the governments in Brussels and Berlin, and also even to the White House. Chapter 7 is the best description how China negotiates. I haven't seen anything better. So get chapter 7 at least, or get the whole book.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. No, but we really found that, I mean, and you mentioned fossil fuels and the huge task to shut down, you know, traditional plants. But if you look at, I mean, China's natural resources and rare earths, I mean, the lithium ion, which kind of is probably part of most batteries today. So there are still a lot of natural advantages that China has. Plus, of course, policy, the whole FDI initiatives of the earlier past. So I guess, I mean, I'm probably an optimist to say that, look, China, if it gets its little wrinkles out of the way, can probably still grow very substantially, isn't it?
Well, again, the study showed that China will grow. Just the delta between how they could grow and the one that possibly they might look up. In 2050, worst case scenario is China's GDP per capita doubles. So that's not minor. There is absolutely no collapse of China in the cards. It's just what we are lamenting is that China actually is underperforming. And hence, we have to see how that works out. Again, I mean, we have this black swan with Omicron and the black swan of the political antagonism. And frankly, also the fact that the one-party rule has its distinctive advantages of getting things done. But one-party rule, as we learned from history, is quite fragile in many other ways. And of course, a country of that economic size with 1.4 billion people, fragile is the last thing we want to see.
Sure. Okay, so let me move to the second part of this discussion, which is primarily to talk a little bit about challenges and any views or any questions that each one of you four have for the other person. And of course, the challenges faced, I think Sung mentioned that inflation is a big issue. So I wondered whether any of you would like to have a comment on what could spoil the party. I mean, what could come in the way and what should we as Asian countries be very wary of as we move forward? Baba, any thoughts from your side?
Yeah, sure. That was a great conversation from Joerg on what's happening in China. But since you talked about inflation, it's my personal belief that China is an expert at exporting inflation. And, you know, in my opinion, it's very simple. You take, for example, steel. They produce more than 1 billion tons of steel. Almost, I think, 65–70% of the world's steel production. If they start buying iron ore at higher prices, the whole steel market changes. If they stop exporting steel, the whole steel market changes. So they can control pricing of most basic commodities and products. Same thing with APIs in the chemical business. And they can control or they can export inflation or they can control inflation. Right now, they're exporting inflation. This whole increase in steel prices, not because some demand has gone up. It's just simply because China has decided to export inflation on steel. And, you know, that is a very worrying factor in terms of China being the dominant player in the global supply chain.
No, that's interesting. So any thoughts, Sung, on, I mean, you mentioned inflation. So do you think that it could be a dampener for the whole world economy, or is it more of a transient phenomenon?
Yeah, so it is a huge concern, you know, for many of the Asian economies, with respect to just, you know, simply coming down to we're as a company facing the commodity price increase, not only the steel and many of the materials that we would need to build, you know, chemical plants, but also raw materials, because of the recent political issues, you know, and also you know, short-term supply and demand, you know, imbalance. The oil price has gone up near $100, you know, a barrel, and that we did not expect it to climb that high as quickly as it did. So it does impact many of the companies and economies as a result. So it is, you know, what we're facing today and what we'll be facing, you know, going forward. And in the longer term, you know, as an example, oil, you know, supply and demand, as you well know, will dominate, you know, the essentially the pricing. In a short term, the politics and you know, supply and demand imbalance will you know, essentially you know, keep the oil price volatile, as you well know. But if, you know, for decades and decades, if you look at the history, it's relative oil prices you know, have stayed relatively low, essentially $45–50 a barrel. So I think, you know, longer term it will settle But I think in a short term, we're facing economic challenges as a result.
What do you think, Nihad? I mean, any specific from your vantage point in Bangladesh? I mean, do you think there are any challenges in the world that might come in the way of your own growth?
Well, there are two things actually. We're talking about since you're talking about inflation.
Yep.
Also, and our local energy prices to industry will go up.
No voice.
Sorry, you're again cutting
Sector
out.
will not be so badly. But other manufacturer concern.
Nihad, you're again cutting out.
Can you hear me again?
Yeah, now it's okay.
Can you hear me again now?
Yeah, now it's okay. Go ahead.
Good, excellent. My concern is actually more the geopolitics of investment. I was quite amused to hear our foreign minister a couple of days ago speaking at the Munich conference, and rather plaintively saying that Bangladesh, he didn't say it in so many words, but I suppose having to balance between regional affairs and others. Countries like ours have a bit of a problem in accessing finance and accessing technology. And I think that will be one of the bigger risk factors that we face going forward.
No, I think that's pretty predictable. You're absolutely right. So, George, one more question to you. I mean, obviously, given your fact that you come from Europe, what do you think is the state of the European economies? I mean, as we were chatting before the session started, you said, look, I mean, we've seen a lot of problems, even in Germany and other parts of Europe. So how do you think, I mean, because Asia will grow, but I mean, vis-a-vis Europe, what does it look like?
Well, you would be surprised to hear that France is developing very fast. It's the fastest growing part of the European economy, 5%. And so we should not underestimate that actually, on the one hand, is of course a catch up. At the same time, it is actually very strong. Unemployment is record low. We actually have problems filling jobs in the service sector, and COVID prohibits us getting people normally coming from Eastern Europe. So in a way, it's full bloom right now. What we're actually lacking in the economy is a distinctive focus on digital. Again, yesterday I had a conference where Germany was involved and their telecom system broke down. And I thought, this is the third world country. I have very stable conditions here, and then Germany knocks itself out. So we are definitely way behind, and I'm always trying to sort of make China, turn China into the Sputnik moment for Germany. We have to stop being complacent. We think we're number one in industries, in cars and chemicals. But as a matter of fact, China's breathing down our neck. And so we have to be aware of this. Second, of course, the European economy is highly fragile when it comes to a couple of rare earths and other elements. And China has been basically weaponizing this. They have been either prohibiting this exports from here, or they have been buying into cobalt in Congo and other places. So when you look in new energy vehicles and batteries, definitely we have to look into this as a challenge. And what China has achieved in many ways is just unbelievable. For once, Europe seems to be united, meaning that all of a sudden we come up with industrial policies to look into medicine, for example, like India. We are totally dependent, not only on India, but also China on the APIs. And we just put 100 million into a factory in Austria to maintain one factory in Europe producing penicillin. I think the COVID lecture for us was we are dangerously dependent on China, and China is not sort of easy on us sometimes. They use it as a political weapon. And so I guess that's also where maybe we can actually team up with India on this kind of topic. So the economy does well, but again, we're falling behind on innovation. Our students are not as eager to learn science technology the Chinese and the Indians are. And we have to do something about it. But otherwise, we still produce pretty good cars.
No, that's very positive. No, but you're absolutely right. I think if you look at APIs, you look at the whole rare earth dominance. I mean, I remember when President Biden came to power in the US, I think one of the elements of that plan was to reduce dependence on rare earths on China. So, but yeah, you're right. I mean, that's an interesting point. There's a couple of questions that have come up from the audience, and I would request the audience, if any of you have questions, please post it. You have a place to post questions and it'll come to us. So the questions are really on balancing the developmental agenda of countries in Asia. I mean, many of us are in very different stages of development with, of course, the climate change and the other agenda. And as many of you know, and of course, even in India now, the popular terminology is ESG, and everybody is expressing concern in the corporate sector on environment, social, and of course, governance. So any thoughts from any one of you on how will it play out? So the question really was, how does one reconcile the different stage of growth of a country or an economy with the compulsion to do whatever we can to limit climate change and move away from fossil fuels? You mentioned China. So Baba, any thoughts on what could be Indian challenges in this area?
Well, as I said in my opening statements, we are in the early stages of industrialization in India. So we don't consume as much energy per capita as, let's say, Germany consumes, or Europe consumes, or the United States consumes, or even Korea and Japan would consume. So therefore, that for us is a huge opportunity of moving from fossil fuels, moving from coal, moving from conventional energy systems to renewable energy systems. And that's why you see huge investments that are taking place in India by the corporate sector in renewable energy. My own guess is that in the next 15 odd years, India will become the biggest renewable energy producer on this planet, and will start exporting energy around the world. Just like the Middle East was exporting oil, we will be exporting green energy around the world. And that will be our point of inflection. And that's why I said, 2030, 2032 will be the kind of time when things in India will be very, very different.
And Baba, do you believe that all the PLI announcements, the productivity linked incentives?
Oh yeah, they're all great. There's a huge response for that.
Yes.
Every company has, put in plans and programs. So you will see rapid investments taking place. I mean, the whole thing is, let's take the auto industry, for example. We produce 3 million autos, four-wheelers, in our country today. Okay. Now, if we want to produce by, let's say, India at 100, 2047, 30 million automobiles or 25 million automobiles, we got to produce 20, 25 million more. It's better to produce this 20, 25 million more with brand new investments in green technology than to start with the conventional technology and retool it to green technology. I mean, Germany makes the best cars in the world. There's no doubt. My garage is full of German cars. Okay. But it's going to be a lot of pain for German automakers to do what Tesla has done in terms of investments, in terms of technology. And as Joerg mentioned, I have 6 plants in Germany, manufacturing plants. Now we are beginning to get labor shortage. You can't even find people to work.
No, that's very interesting. And Sung, just one question to you, because you did mention that LG's agenda is very strongly focused on, as you said, to be carbon neutral as well as to be zero carbon at some point. So is that something that you're seeing across Korean industry, that everybody is very obsessed or very focused on the whole environment and environmental commitments?
I must admit that LG Chem is leading in that space in terms of setting a specific roadmap to achieve essentially net zero by 2050. Other companies are following very, very closely, and many, as I indicated earlier, many of the industrial players have a need to reduce carbon emissions from their operations, and such as steel company like POSCO, and many of the chemical companies who are our competitors here. So they are following suit, and they are looking at, as Baba indicated earlier, I wholly agree with what he said. India is going to be the green energy producer and will be the exporter, and Korea will be the importer of that energy. And if I think Saudi and Chile and many of the countries talked about producing green hydrogen from solar energy, and will be exporting. I think the India is going to be able to compete with the amount of not only the solar the intensity in some of the states in Western India, but many of the companies like Adani is investing. I mean, they are the one of the largest producers of renewable energy, and there will be they'll produce these things in a cost-effective manner, and will be exporting to countries like Germany, Korea, and Japan, where we need it. So many companies are following suit, looking at deployment of clean hydrogen to reduce their emissions. We see this as an industry, as a country, that this is a mission that we need to achieve. But there are still lots of challenges and long road ahead, I must admit.
There's another question from the audience on China. Again, I think you've kind of answered that earlier, but maybe just another thought on that. He was saying that, look, with so much focus on the internal economy that China is doing, I mean, obviously we all know that the way China did those 3 decades of 10% plus growth was moving people from agrarian pursuits and agriculture to the industrial cities. And even when in my first experiment with setting up training centers for computers in China in partnership with Beijing University, we figured there was a lot of demand for people to really move towards industry, move towards digital. So his question was that if there is less focus on being globally competitive and a satisfaction or maybe a complacency about, okay, we have a large domestic economy, will that affect the manufacturing effectiveness and the quality of Chinese manufacturing?
Well, I mean, the Chinese are very ingenious. They really are very good at inventing things. I'm not sure they're very good at innovation, basic innovation. They're certainly extremely good at development of products, adding another feature, adding another business system. But they still have to prove that actually they can match the Koreans or the Japanese or the Taiwanese on basic research. And that is actually surprising how long it takes. Even 40 years after opening up, few companies are anywhere close to where LG Chem was at that time. So in a way, it's very interesting to see that China has been introducing a lot of laws recently, cybersecurity law, data transfer law, that actually makes it very hard for international companies to do research in China, because given a certain data amount, we have to disclose it to the government. Do we want this for development? Maybe. Do we want this for research? Certainly not. And on top of it, of course, we have this cybersecurity issues that we can only buy now, in most cases, Chinese equipment and Chinese software, which in itself then might be penetrable by whoever's interested. So I'm trying to tell the Chinese leadership is, you are sacrificing economic growth on the altar of control. You really have the security apparatus pushing aside the economic ministries in order to actually make sure the country will be more secure and more controlled with all kinds of mechanisms. But again, there might be a long-term cost that we are foreseeing. So in a way, China is frankly undermining the superpower house that they could be. And hence, I find it very hard to imagine that I will see here a company coming out like Samsung, like LG Chemicals, like TSMC, and so forth. And of course, on top of it is also because their antagonistic approach towards Taiwan, towards Japan, towards Korea, towards India, certainly, China might cut itself off from certain technologies. A lot of Korean companies are leaving China because they had a hard time. I mean, the recent departure of Lotte was shocking because Lotte put these THAAD missiles on the golf ground of Lotte, and hence the Chinese couldn't forgive them, and bang, out they went. So in a way, China undermines it again for political grandstanding. So in a funny twist, the country grew strong because of very strong and determined politicians, but now they seem to be their own worst enemy.
No, but interestingly, I mean, I was speaking in the Asia Society conference in Tianjin a few years ago, and just chatting with the mayor. And the figure he told me of Tianjin as a city's investments in AI was more than the whole of India. So I'm saying the scale at which research is happening and the scale at which AI is happening, and my own belief is that in artificial intelligence, China may be even having a lead over America. So there are some pockets where I guess huge investments are happening, but at the same time, as you said, maybe not too much of innovation everywhere.
Yeah, you have to be very cautious with Chinese statements like this and with statistics. I mean, China has the biggest pool of AI specialists by far, but only 10% of them want to live in China. 90% wants to live in Australia, America, and other places. And that's the thing. You know, these guys are highly trained, and they have a certain idea about personal life, freedom, and so forth. And we see a shocking departure of talents. And actually the US, if it's smart, or Europe, should actually embrace them and sort of make it very cozy for them to come home. But no, because they're from China, they make their life difficult. It's just mind-blowing. So in many ways, yes, the figures are big, but you know, the VC capitalists, the guys, the Jack Ma's of this world in China, are now basically rattled and shocked about what happened to their peers over the last 3 years. Do we really want to spend that money if common prosperity is announced and then basically the state puts its fingers into my wallet? And there has been a lot of disenchantment among these Steve Jobs of China over the last 2 years about that they were put in the right place. So again, we have a very strange thing. The potential is just multitude, but the actions seem to be, you know, control first and success maybe not.
Okay, there's one interesting question, and I'll probably be the last question we'll be able to take. But I mean, somebody's talking about, I mean, post-COVID, there's been huge supply chain disruptions everywhere. And do you folks as industry leaders believe that the supply chain disruptions are getting addressed now and we will be able to continue industrial growth? Baba?
The biggest supply chain disruptions that you read in the newspapers and TV channels is semiconductors.
Yes.
But actually, it's not just semiconductors. It's almost everything, right from you know, the fires in Texas to the fire in Japan, you know, to flood somewhere else. I mean, there's all kinds of things. I mean, the Texas fire shut down the manufacturing of foam that is required in car seats. So you couldn't make cars without the foam. So, you know, there are all kinds of issues. But the bigger issue is semiconductors. And the reason for that is very simple. You know, we are all using more and more electronic gadgets in our day-to-day lives. I mean, today you look at India, I don't know the numbers exactly, but I think 65% of Indians have smartphones, one way or the other. And, you know, all this is changing so rapidly that the use of semiconductors is increasing at a very, very rapid pace. And there are not enough semiconductor plants as of now. Now, clearly, many governments have taken steps. Europe is now setting up plants. Bosch has their new plant is being commissioned in Dresden. I'm going to see it in the month of May. The US is commissioning a couple of plants. India is very serious in getting, you know, a couple of semiconductor plants, but that takes a decade before things happen. It's not something that is going to happen very quickly. So I think we are going to see shortages as far as electronic products. I mean, because of semiconductors for some time to come, but it won't be as bad as what it has been in the last 6 months.
Got it. I think that makes sense. Okay, so let me ask you for some quick closing comments. I mean, from this panel and your other thoughts on anything specific that you think Asia should do in the forthcoming years. I mean, literally in the next 2 years, to continue to fulfill the optimism that all of you have shown on this channel. Let me start with you, Nihad. Any thoughts on?
Yes, very quickly. Before answering that question, Ganesh, I have to tell you that I'm actually using a Chinese car nowadays. and find it rather comfortable. Secondly, the ESG issue. You see, Bangladesh, at least in the garments industry, has more than 150 LEED certified factories, and I think 7 or 8 of the top platinum certified factories are here. The issue is that we don't get a price to match the investment, and that for a country like Bangladesh, and in achieving the sustainable development goals, is going to be a problem. And we will have to balance our resources there. I think one of the best compliments I ever heard anyone give Bangladesh was by a former Chinese ambassador to Bangladesh, who said that Bangladesh feeds more than 10% of China's population on less than 4% of China's land and a fraction of China's resources. Likewise, our comparison with India there also is there. We need to be able to have regional connectivity and also a removal of barriers if we are going to really move forward, as I had mentioned earlier. So that is the potential is there. Innovation you were talking about, and the potential is there. So like in Bangladesh, 2 young men have come up with a software. It's very funny. The face recognition software used in the West does not distinguish our features, apparently, or Asian features very well. These young men have come up with a software which does that with more than 80% accuracy. And so somewhere in Dhaka, they're sitting in a room, they're doing this. So we have that potential. But in order to really have maturity there, we will need support. And if Asia just concentrates on its divisions, China, India, Japan, historical, political, legacy differences, we're not going to get there. So that is something I think our politicians really, really need to think about. And I think from industry, we are pressing our policymakers to get out of that mindset.
Oh, that's
Thanks.
amazing. In the opening panel, we had our external affairs minister and the ministers from Bhutan and Sri Lanka actually talking about this, that local collaborations are going to be extremely critical. What do you think, Sung? Any closing thoughts from your side?
Yeah, no, I appreciated the conversations, and it's been tremendously enlightening from my perspective to participate. And one of the thoughts that I have is as I look to grow LG Chem's business, I'm looking at certainly China has done its job, but I'm looking at India. India has a huge potential for the consumption of not only the energy and the plastics industry per capita is the consumption is relatively low, and it hasn't grown like China has. And I do believe it's going to be a significant market going forward with the mix of the green energy that it can actually produce. I think we can actually deploy chemical plants that are lowest emitting plants globally as we look to new projects. And I think it's got a win-win combination that we look to take advantage of. So good luck, and look forward to being in India. Thank you.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Thank you so much. Baba, any closing thought from your side?
No, I think, I agree with what our friend from Korea said. I think this whole change and revolution towards green energy is going to create some amazing new opportunities, not only for India, but I think for Asia as a whole. India will be the energy producer. Countries in Asia like Korea, Japan, of course, are the companies that have technology and processes. So all that comes together, we'll have a more prosperous Asia going forward.
Awesome. George, the last word from you.
Well, Radio Beijing last. Well, I can only say that connectivity, everything what the lady from Bangladesh said was completely right. Connecting, trying to open up borders, trying to be more competitive, less protectionistic, and so forth. Otherwise, innovation never really blossoms. But at the same time, also, I really have to caution The fact that China, again, is living behind the Great Wall and has no herd immunity, no nothing. And as we have seen already now, just 1 or 2 cases and a port goes down. We have now the situation today that you can't fly from Wuhan again to Beijing because there were 2 or 3 cases. That rings a bell. Wuhan was, of course, the center, the beginning of all of that. I'm deeply worried about the supply chain issue if China actually has a hard time controlling Omicron here, given also the lack of protection that they have. The good news is they just introduced Pfizer's drug, which was nice, admitting that they don't have anything similar. So overcoming the nationalism, everything has to be Chinese to show that China deals with COVID best. But I think we might really have a very ironic situation that India, Bangladesh, Korea, Europe opens up and they travel and engage, and I'm still behind the Great Wall of China.
We hope not, Joerg, for your own sake. Okay, let me close this by saying that I think we've had an amazing conversation, and thank you so much, all of you, for being very frank and candid with your comments. And to close on what Nihad just said, I mean, if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, I mean, we go all the way from zero poverty, zero hunger, into all the facets that we mentioned, but it ends with SDG 17, which is collaboration. And you absolutely said, and I totally agree that, I mean, collaborating across Asia would probably make us a much more formidable force and will be obviously very good for all the citizens of the country. So thank you all very much for being a wonderful set of panelists, and back to you, Shilpa.
Thank you, Dr. Natarajan. With that, day 1 of the Asia Economic Dialogue 2022 comes to an end. I'm sure all our viewers have enjoyed the rich and stimulating conversations and hope to see you all and many, many more back here tomorrow. Day 2 starts at 3 p.m. India time. Thank you once again to all our panelists and chairpersons. Good morning, good evening, good night, Shubhratri.